Well, when a bunch of anti-Semitic toughs parades through the streets of North London and shouting abuse at Jews, well, it's shocking, but it happens. You know, prejudice and violence happens in any society. But when it's the police, you've got a problem. And another rather shocking video from the Palestine demo in London on the 15th of May has surfaced. And it's a video of a policewoman who appears to be of some sort of Asian extraction. And she is showing a very unprofessional sympathy with the demonstrators she is meant to be policing. But first, I want to make some further comments about the men, obviously of Pakistani heritage, who, following on from the Saturday demonstration in central London, the next day, the Sunday, were driving through various suburbs of London, areas well known for having large Jewish populations, shouting some shockingly awful stuff. If you didn't see that video, you can check it out. I'll leave a link in the description. But to boil it down, the burden of their argument was that committing sexual violence on British Jews would help the situation in Gaza. I'm just guessing here, but I suppose that in their twisted and evidently not particularly high-functioning brains, they might have thought that by making Jews miserable in this country, they would induce the Israeli government to act in a different way. Well, in fact, all it would do would be to encourage more Jews to head straight for Israel, no doubt increasing the population there, as well as the number of doctors. Oh, but I'm getting sidetracked. Okay, well, those chaps were displaying... It wasn't much of a strategy that would benefit anyone, now was it? But it certainly was a pretty obvious and horrible display of violence, racism and supremacism. Why should this concern the British public at large? Well, at present, those men happen not to like Jews, but at another time it could easily be some other group, as has been demonstrated in several court cases which have cropped up from Pakistani groups in the north of, the north of the country. But actually, it's all over the place, isn't it? And these men here were talking about rape as a political weapon. So we have to think about this very carefully. First of all, I must make the caveat that this isn't an attitude of all Muslims. It is, generally speaking, an attitude from a particularly and usually rather, educationally challenged subset. But still, it is a recognisable group, and we really cannot afford to ignore them. We can't just hope they'll go away, and we cannot allow the Pakistani Muslims to ignore them either, because that's what they're doing at the moment. Several comments under my last video claimed that the soundtrack of them threatening violence to Jews was a fake. There are people who actually believe that this was faked up. In other words, there are some members of the Muslim community, and I think it's a rather large proportion in this case, because it is a cultural thing which has been recognised even by other Muslims, let alone by external critics. There is this thing about not accepting responsibility for the failings of Islam. It is pretty well ingrained into current Muslim culture. So when any Muslim is caught for anything, the knee-jerk reaction is to deny that it happened, even while there is a sub-understanding that it did happen. The Muslim community should not be allowed to get away with this, and that is our problem, the larger British public. And that's part of my next question. And the question is this: why should these men consider that they might be able to get away with shouting such racism in the streets of London? Yet why did they think this wasn't going to have any effect on them? Obviously, whoever was doing the shouting thought that there wouldn't be any comeback, or maybe slap on the wrist or something. As I pointed out in my last video, if a bunch of white men had festooned their cars with Union flags and had driven through Tower Hamlets, a heavily Muslim part of London, shouting the same threats to Muslims, those fools were shouting to Jews, then there would have been plenty of comeback. And I remember a case of a man who put a slice of bacon or a bacon sandwich or something on a mosque doorstep and got sent to jail for a year. And it was very quick as well. In this case, though, I've read that those guys were loose in North London for 3 hours before the police swung into action. And they were finally stopped only when they were heading out of London on their way home, judging from where I read that they were picked up. My guess is that the police were trying not to act at all. But as hundreds of social media posts and phone calls came flooding in, they were embarrassed into action. And that's the problem. Because the police are so terrified of being called racist, they cut these Pakistani communities an amount of slack that they just don't deserve. Let's not forget that many men of that particular heritage, as I've already mentioned, have been running kidnapping and slavery rings for years. Now, although most Muslims have not been taking part in this illegal activity, they must have known about it and kept quiet. And they must have also noticed the silent complicity of a cowed police force. The Pakistani community in the UK is a fairly small and closed world. The fact that those men proposing the rape of girls as an answer to a political disagreement, well, they too must be fully aware of the Pakistani men who've been arrested for the abduction and rape of girls in the north of England, and that's where they were from. They might even know some of the men involved, and although they cannot admit even to themselves that their culture has a problem in times of stress, this contaminated attitude to non-Muslims just pops out. Obviously, that man who was shouting about rape, he had a script and he'd gone off script for a minute. It just came out. He couldn't stop it. And he didn't see any external assistance for self-control, because he also knows that the police can be manipulated and bullied into silence. So why shouldn't those men believe that they can say what they like and get away with it? Well, at least a telling off at worst. Now, let's get back to the police. The whole police system has been corrupted by a terror of being called out for racism. So in answer to that, they've not only tried to avoid negative contact with Muslim communities, they've also made great efforts to encourage Muslims to join the police force in an attempt at, integration and more community policing and all the rest of it. But this has been apparently at the expense of admitting people who, it seems, are totally unsuitable for the job. I'm not saying all, of course, but if there is an eagerness to ramp up the numbers, there is obviously going to be a significant proportion of ethnic minority police officers on the force who might make very good shop, office or factory workers, but who lack the basic intelligence to be police officers. And yet they've been given a uniform because someone wanted more brown faces in the group photo. Now, I can do no better to illustrate what I just said than by playing you another video from the pro-Palestinian demo. And here it is. Well, that was depressing, wasn't it? Why not treat yourself or a favoured relative or friend to these magnificent examples of merch? The mugs and t-shirts come in the Graniopteryx design or Grambo with a firearm or the more deadly knitting needles. Go to www.graniopteryx.com and whatever platform you're watching this on, please click like, subscribe and share.